And we sold for $255 million. The beginning of it was such a shit show. It was like we'd captured lightning in a bottle. You know, my mom died. My 13-year-old son went into rehab. My marriage fell apart. I mean, it was just like, wow. I had the perfect life, the perfect hair, the perfect sons, the perfect marriage. And it was not real. Let's just like let it all be a little more real and messy and not so perfect. Hi, I'm Alli Webb. I'm the founder of Drybar and Messy, and welcome to the Burnouts podcast.
Welcome to the Burnouts.
Thanks for having me.
We want to start from the beginning. You had moved to New York City and you wanted to pursue a career in fashion, and then you ended up pivoting into beauty. Can you tell us more about that time period and what sparked the change?
Well, I grew up in South Florida, where my naturally curly hair was very frizzy and crazy. And I think I clocked like the 10,000, Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours makes you an expert. I definitely clocked that in high school. And I always had like an affinity for hair. But, I also loved fashion, and I love what you guys are doing, by the way. And have done a little deep dive on your company, and I'm like an avid online shopper. So I moved to New York, and I actually worked for Cynthia Raleigh and Nicole Miller. The 20-somethings listening to this may not know who they are, but they were big designers in that time. And my parents, although they were in like the schmata business and they were entrepreneurs in South Florida and had a clothing line, I thought I wanted to go do something in fashion. And so I moved to New York with that kind of goal. And then I was working for the Nicole Miller store in Soho, which no longer exists, but it was a fun opportunity. My brother Michael, who's been my business partner in Drybar and beyond, and Messy and beyond, he was working at the corporate office with Nicole. And so, he had the idea to move back to South Florida, where we grew up, and open Nicole Miller boutiques in South Florida. So we were, I don't know if you guys know Meisner Park, but it's a big place in Boca where we grew up, and then Miami. So at the ripe old age of like 20, I found myself like running two retail clothing operations. And I was like, I don't know if this is like it for me. And my brother and I were fighting a lot. We were so young and like didn't know what we were doing. And that was really when I decided to go to beauty school. So I was back, I had been in New York for a little while, moved back to South Florida, went to beauty school, became a hairstylist, worked, for a local guy, and really fell in love with the industry. And then would later move back to New York and work for John Sahag. He was like the pioneer of dry cutting and was amazing. And, I marched in with my leather pants and I was like, giving him the eyes, like, I'm going to get this fucking job. And I did. And that was such a cool experience. And then, like a true 20-year-old ish, I was like, oh, I had friends working in PR and they were going to cool parties and doing cool stuff. I was like, maybe I'll do that. And so, I did all sorts of things in my early 20s. And, I didn't start Drybar till I was 35.
I want to pause there and go back to that first job that you had in that interview. You say you walk in, you're giving him the eyes. How did you land that job? And what tips do you have for people? I imagine Drybar, you guys are a huge company now, is very hard to get into and to work out. What big interview tips would you give that you said got you that first kind of foot in the door?
I think I was really confident. I walked in with a lot of like energy. I had studied John Sahag. I knew who he was and what he did. And I just was like, looking back, who knows what I looked like at the time, but I wanted to be like the cool girl who like walked in with a lot of confidence of like, I'm going to get this job, and I was very self-assured. That's what I like somebody who comes in, who knows who they are, who've, done their research. I can't tell you how many interviews I've done over the years at Drybar where people like just didn't know basic stuff they should know about me, about the company. And I'm like, what are you doing here? Like, I'm like, what? And I was never that girl. I was always like, I'm going to come in. And just like last night, I was researching you guys because like, I don't ever show up unprepared for what I'm going to do. I can certainly wing it with the best of them. And I am actually pretty good on my feet, but you have to you have that confidence. And I was like, it was the only place in New York I wanted to work. It was the only hairstylist I wanted to work for. And I was like, I'm going to play this part in my tight leather pants. I knew I was going to get the job, and I did.
And then what did the rest of your career look like from that point until you actually decided to start Drybar?
Granted, I was working as like an assistant at John Sahag. So it wasn't like I walked in and I got a big stylist job, which was, that was a very coveted role, but I loved it. And I loved just being in his presence. He was so amazing. And I learned so much from him. And the way that they approach hair is they flat iron your hair, then they cut it. And then somebody like me, an assistant, washes it and blows it out. So it was like high pressure.
Yeah.
John Sahag was like a blowout boot camp because I was blow drying really famous, well-known, like executive. You name it. It was really where I feel like I cut my teeth in like the blowout world because it was like a lot of pressure. So I did that for a while. And then I just felt like I don't know if I want to do this
Yeah.
anymore. I was like, I was jumping around and trying different things. And like I said, I had friends who were working in PR and their lives looked more fun than mine. So I was like, I think I want to do that. And so I jumped around. I met my first ex-husband. I've got a lot of them who, we met, fell in love, moved to LA, had babies. And so like when I was 32, I had 2 kids under 2 and I was stay-at-home mom living in LA. My husband at the time was like a creative advertising guy and that's what brought us to LA. And I wanted to be a mom so bad and I couldn't believe that I was like able to like be a stay-at-home mom and I just thought it was the coolest thing and I loved it. But after a couple of years of that, I was like, I love my children and I loved having the opportunity. I felt so lucky that I was able to stay home with my kids, but I just was like itching for something to do for myself, and now at this point I had spent so many years in the hair industry and my best friend had really curly hair and I was always blow out her hair and all my friends' hair, but I had like babies, like they
Yeah.
were still crawling, and I was like, what can I do at like a new mom pace? And, that's when the idea for my mobile business which was called Straight at Home. I was like, I live in LA. People care about their appearance, and so I decided that Cam, my ex-husband, made me this one-page website called Straight at Home, which I came up with that name and I was very proud of it. And it was like literally one page. And there was like a mommy blog called Peachhead that was like a Google group. I mean, this is so many years ago. And I posted a thing saying, hey, I'm a stay-at-home mom, longtime hairstylist. I'm thinking about starting a mobile blowout business where I come over while your baby is sleeping. That was my pitch. And and I was charged $40. I was like, and literally me and my best friend were like, I don't know, 220s. That seems easy enough. I mean, that was the business plan. And so I posted this and I started getting so many calls. And that was such an interesting time because I was living in like a tiny apartment in Santa Monica and I was getting called to like the Palisades and Brentwood. And I would walk in these houses and I was like, wow, people live like this, and it was such an inspirational thing for me to be like, oh, like this is the other side, it was like Palisades and whatever. And I was, a lot of celebrities, like I would go to like Jennifer Garner's house and like, it was just nuts. And I came from this like small town in Boca Raton, Florida, and I just was exposed to all of this. And I think it really was like part of my journey of like, oh, I want more out of my life. And like, I want a house like this. But anyways, so I started this business and I got so busy so fast and I was blow drying women all over town and really like it was perfect for me at the time. And I remember feeling like this is all I need. Like I'm so happy. Like I'm getting out of the house, getting away from my kids for a couple hours. I'm technically not really making any money between driving and gas. And I was like, with my like duffel bag of products, but I was meeting amazing women. And so, fast forward to like not even a year later when I was so busy that I was having to say no more than I was saying yes because I was just like one woman. And I was like, gosh, maybe instead of me going to them, I should like build a place where they come to me. And that's when I went to my brother, and my brother was like one of the first employees at Yahoo and he had made some money. And so I was like, hey, I had no money. And I was like, I want to turn my mobile blowout business into a brick and mortar. I need help. And I just, I didn't have like any business acumen at that point. And I was just like, I just had the idea. And it's funny because I don't tell this story a lot, but because my mobile business was called Straight at Home, when we were concepting Drybar, we were like, maybe we call it Straight Bar. Like, can you imagine? We probably
Oh
wouldn't be
my
sitting
God.
here.
Oh
I
my
know.
God.
And all my friends were like, no, you can't. I was like, I know, it's a bad name. But
You should, the names we had for Fia were horrible, like Renaissance with 2 S's.
yeah, I mean, you're
Oh.
just like, you're in the ideation stage.
Yeah.
And we were like, no. And Drybar kind of kept coming up, but Drybar, we'd made up that name, so that was just felt weird to make up a name, but that's what we did. But anyways, so I went to my brother and said, I've got this high class problem. I've got too many clients, not enough of me. We open a location and we charge a low enough price where it's this affordable luxury that women everywhere can partake in. I think it could work. And this was also 2009. So we were on the like tail end of a recession, but I was like, I think this could work, but a lot of like what ifs. The first shopping center that we opened in Brentwood was totally dead. And, I remember when we were building that location, my brother and I would walk and he was like, there's nobody here. Like, how is this going to work? And I was like, if we build it, they'll come. And I was like, it's going to be fine. And meanwhile, it was all my brother's money basically on the line. So, and we had to like personally guarantee that lease. Like it was crazy. But we opened that first store and, I'm sure you guys remember Daily Candy. I
Yeah.
was just talking to somebody about that and they're like, no idea what Daily Candy is. And I was like, wow, like Daily Candy was such a part of like, it was such the thing. And Daily Candy wrote a thing about us. And, the thing about what we did is that, blowouts were a thing already. Like women were getting blowouts, but there just wasn't a space and an experience like Drybar. And that's really what I was excited to create. I was like, I think if it's $35, women will do this really frequently. And that was my hope. And at that time, I mean, that first store in Brentwood had 8 chairs. And it was like, I don't know, can we do 35, 40 blowouts a day? Like that seems like it'd be a viable business. Little did I know we were going to be closer to like 80 to 100 a day. The beginning of it was such a shit show. I mean, we were so understaffed, underprepared, like had no idea what was coming. I mean, it was an amazing problem to have, but it was overwhelming nonetheless. And, we opened that first store in February 2010. And it was like we'd captured lightning in a bottle and like, the rest is history.
That's so incredible because I think very few people in their founding journeys get to really experience like what product market fit feels like what having the right product is. And it's described as
Unbelievable.
lightning in a bottle from everyone
Yeah.
that, we've discussed it with is
Yeah.
just this up and to the right of people coming, people wanting this product. When did online booking come into it? Because I know we were talking about like, you couldn't go online and book a hair
Yeah.
appointment, a nail appointment. Like
Yeah.
that seems so simple to us today.
Yeah.
But when did that become a part of the business?
Well, from the jump, I mean, nobody was really using iPhones then, but the booking system that we were using, the point of sale was, and you could book online, but most people would do it like literally on their laptops, which doesn't happen anymore. I was actually listening to you guys on the Skinny Confidential last night where you were saying like you had built the first rendition online and your friends were like, who shops online? And we're all
Yeah.
on our phones, which is true, but back then it was quite the opposite. Nobody was shopping on their phones because we were probably using Blackberries. But yeah, I mean, the platform we used, what made online booking possible. And so that was what was a really interesting learn. I mean, there's so many interesting learnings in the beginning, but like I said, we saw these notifications coming in. So in my mind, I'm picturing, women just sitting on their laptops. And I remember saying in interviews like, oh, it can be like 11 o'clock at night and you could book an appointment at Drybar. No, but you don't have to, it was automated. And actually we didn't know, obviously there was just so many unanswered questions at that point. Like, is it going to be a walk-in business or is it going to be a booking? We didn't know. And we put like Poppins welcome on all our collateral on the front window everywhere. But turned out that women were actually booking. So we were booked solid from the get-go of that first location. And yet women were still walking in and we were like, uh-oh, like we were so busy. I mean, I had to say no, which was like, they're like, but you said walk-ins welcome. But I was like, I know I would like to do your hair too. I mean, we had no idea what to expect. And even with that is like a funny story I haven't told in so long, but just like any business, you have and again, cell phones weren't exactly what they were then. And I mean, people still have landlines today kind of, but landlines are a big deal and you call a hair salon and someone picks up the phone and answers and books your appointment. So I had that, but it was so loud between the music, the blow dryers, and everything in there was so loud that when people were calling, first of all, you could barely hear them. Second of all, it was so busy. And I remember like I would just be trying to check someone in and out. The phone would be ringing. It was literally chaos and bananas. Like it was nuts. And I was like, and the phone kept ringing. And I was like, we can't answer the fucking phone right now. Like, and so I was like, literally the first week I was like, stop answering the phone, let it go to voicemail, which is crazy. And we'll call everybody back. And it was like at the end of the night, we would listen to those voicemails and then we'd call people back and, the next day to book. It was so, I mean, like who would have thought that's a problem? And so we very quickly found ourselves in the call center business. So we pulled the phones out of the shop and this would go on. I mean, 150 locations, but the first couple locations, we were like hiring people outside who worked from home to answer the phones at Drybar. I mean, it was like, who would have thought of that? Like, I didn't want to be in the call center business, but we had no choice. I mean, that was just like the nature of this very fast pace, like, like kind of hit the ground running business that we were in. And we had to like figure it out and adjust. And there was just so many crazy things that happened like that in the early days that we couldn't have seen coming,
Well, now I know why when I call Drybar,
Yeah.
they never pick up.
Yeah.
But it is.
Well, and we really incentivized people. We would run promotions all the time. No matter what we did, always 50% of women called and 50% booked online. And I was like, why? I remember like I would see women and they'd be like, no, I always call. And I'm like, why? It's so easy to book online. Don't call us, But people like, because the other thing about it was that, unlike traditional hair salons had always been, the model I was trying to create with Drybar, which I think we did, was like, I want you to come in and see, it doesn't matter who you see, like they're all going to be great. I mean, it'll be different. There'll be personalities you like more than others. But the idea was like, you're going to sit in anybody's chair and it's going to be great. And that was hard to get women to accept that. And I got, a lot of feedback on that. And I was like, well, there wasn't the capability to do it, which is why we really didn't do it. And I was like, you can sit with anybody and it'll be great, and usually it was.
And talk me through, when did you guys decide to expand into products as well?
So after we raised our first tranche of private equity, which was about 26 million in year 2, I guess, the stores were very expensive to build and we couldn't grow quickly enough. And we knew we needed to expand very quickly because we had a lot of copycats on our tail, and if we were going to be the leader in the space, we had to move fast. So we were, that's a whole other conversation about, raising money and equity that I didn't really understand back then. And it was like owning a smaller piece of a bigger pie and that was a hard concept for me because I was like, we're going to have to give up how much equity, but we really needed to raise money if we were going to be the leader. And I really wanted that. So our first tranche was with this company called Castanea. They're now Stride. And we wanted to raise, like 10 or 15 million. They didn't want to write a check for less than 20 million. And we had landed on 25 million. And I had said, to them, well, Jenna Gerwich, who's the founder of Laura Mercier Cosmetics, she was a partner in Castanea at that point. And she had, had a really amazing career. And I talked to her a lot about wanting to build a product line, but really had no idea how to do it. And because she had built Laura Mercier, she really knew how to do it. And she had connections with all these labs. She introduced us to the then founder of Sephora. And I had a very specific idea of what I wanted to do for product. It was like, everything was crafted to make to give you the best blowout and make it last as long as humanly possible, because that's what women wanted. And so the product came, but everybody was a little, my brother and, the team at Castanea, as great as they were, everybody was very, very focused on the stores. And I, being in the stores every day, witnessing the blowouts, I knew how important product was, because we were using, a mishmash of products from, I think we had we had some L'Oreal, Moroccan oil, and it just didn't all work together well. And so I really wanted to start the product line. They were very focused on just the growth of the locations, which I understood, but I really just had a vision for that. And I think we earmarked $1 million of that 26 million to start product. But, we launched our product. We did a test in Sephora at 75 doors, about, I guess it was the third year. And at that point we had about 10 or 11 Drybar locations. So we were getting known, it was turning into a love brand. So we launched in 75 doors as a test, and we really made, a dent in Sephora, and it did really, really well. And then we would, end up expanding into all the locations. And then we went into Ulta and Nordstrom, and the product business became huge, which is very gratifying for me, because everybody was like, yeah, product, and I'm like, yeah, product is going to bring us all home, guys. And it did.
That's incredible, because we were talking about this. I love Drybar. I have my subscription. I go twice a month. And I think it's so interesting because that was what initially got me hooked on the product lines, because I was like, well, if I can't get my blowout, I might as well do it myself, with these tools.
That's exactly why I did it.
And what I'm really curious about is the thing that I liked the most about Drybar was actually the hot tools. I really liked the hot tools. When did that become part of the equation?
We were kind of white labeling in the beginning. The Buttercup, the yellow blow dryer, would go through many iterations, and then the curling irons. And it was funny because I was kind of this perfect combination of a hairstylist and a really tough customer in one. And I was like, what do I want from both ends of the spectrum? And that's kind of how I built the hot tools. And, we had the linear on Sephora, and it was and the margins on the hot tools were quite good, and so that was really the bread and butter.
They were very expensive.
Yeah, they were very expensive. Yeah. But, the wet products were a lot, the margins weren't as good.
Yeah.
So we really leaned into the hot tools, and they were great, and
because what was it? There was a brush, a hot brush.
Yeah, a blow dry brush.
That was what I had gotten, and I hadn't had that as a tool before and it
Yeah.
was perfect because it could do
It was
everything
great.
for me.
Yeah. It's a
And
great tool.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I'm curious. So was it that you were like, oh, this is a really cumbersome process for people. We should develop a better
Exactly. I
tool?
mean, the impetus was always like, I knew that women wanted to create what we were creating in Drybar. My first book was called The Drybar Guide to Good Hair for All, which was very much a tutorial about how to get, how to do your bangs, how to get this kind of look, how to get that kind of look. Like everything was about that. So I knew that like women who didn't have access to a dry bar in their neighborhood, or if they couldn't get an appointment, if I gave them the tools and then now this book that like helps teach them how to do whatever, that was our pitch. Like, here are the same products and tools that our stylists are using every day in Drybar, and now you can have them at home too. And it worked.
How key was getting into Sephora, like for revenue versus like a Nordstrom or other places where you featured it?
Well, Sephora, it's so interesting how the world's changed, because like influencers weren't, like, there wasn't TikTok. And so Sephora was really the authority on like what brand, and like to get into Sephora, it's still, to get into Sephora is a big deal. Although now it's more like the influencers are influencing like how women shop. But back then influencers weren't as big of a thing. And so getting into Sephora was a very big deal. And I still believe Sephora is like the quintessential prestige brand builders. And there's just a certain like clout and respect that you have from going into Sephora and going into Nordstrom, which I think that landscape has changed so much too. I mean, obviously department stores are just not what they were 15 years ago. And then Ulta was really great too, because Ulta, it's, as you know, is like prestige meets mass. So you can get like toothpaste and, dry shampoo. So it's a really interesting, makeup, but it was a process. I mean, it took us several years to get into all of those different locations and really build that business. And we hadn't even like scratched the surface on international, which was a big part of like the sale. It's like there's so much runway here to really build this business.
Well, I also want to understand because your path took the form of you raised this initial capital funding, you continued raising, and then you ended up selling the business.
Yeah.
What did that look like? Like, why? What was the reason you guys decided to sell?
Well, we were 10 years in, and at that point, by then we had raised like $75 million. And so we had, private equity that wanted us to sell. And I think I was just like, it became a lot of rinse and repeat. I mean, I think building the product line was the most exciting part for me at that point, because I was like, there's just a million different types of hair. So there was like all these products. And that's kind of like now the world that I'm in, that I'm so excited about, because I really loved building the product line. Um, yeah, but I think it just became this like rinse and repeat. And I was like, and we had hired so many great people that were running the organization. I was like, I don't think I need to
Mhm.
be doing, I wasn't, it was a great model. And it was like sending my baby to college. I was like, you've got this, and I think I was just ready. And, the private equity is ready to be out. And I think we were just, it's interesting to me, seeing people who stay in their businesses for like 20, 30 years, and it's admirable and amazing. I'm too like shiny
Yeah.
objects and wanted what's next.
Yeah.
I was ready to move on to something else.
And what does the process of selling a business look like? Like, is it public? Did you guys share how much you sold it for?
Yeah, it was public. I mean, it's not always public, but it was in our case. And we sold for 255 million to Helen of Troy, which you can look up. Um, and for the record, people listening, I did not take home and pocket 255 million. I wish I did. But by the time we sold, we had so many partners and investors that, most of that money went to them. And that's the process of selling. And that's, also the process of growing. And you can decide if you want to grow slow or grow fast. And I've had friends and, other founders who've done it both ways. And, there's pros and cons to both. I mean, we felt, like I was saying earlier, that we were really, we had all these copycats on our tails. And we wanted to be the leader in the space. So we decided to grow fast, which meant we needed to raise a lot of
Mhm.
capital to do that. And that was our path. I mean, I don't think I would have done it any differently. I wish I had held on to more equity as we grew, but
Has that informed how you look at your new business?
it largely does. And my brother and I, who are now co-CEOs in Messy, like we have a lot of conversations about this. And I'm much more vigilant about how we are raising money and how we are thinking about raising money, and making sure that I, hold on to a certain amount of equity. It's really important to me.
Because I remember from the very beginning of this conversation, you were saying it was a big learning about owning a small piece of a big pie or a
Yeah.
big piece of a small pie. So
Yeah.
that's why I was curious, like what that
Yeah.
looks like for you
I
now.
want to own a medium piece of a big pie.
Love.
Yeah. Yeah, because no one really sees it. I mean, even like when you saw like somebody after Haley Bieber's sale and somebody broke down what she actually made, which was still quite a lot of money. You're like, but she didn't make $1 billion, and
Of
like
course.
people, I think that it's important that people understand that it's not how it works. And you
Yeah.
need partners and you need help growing and you need a great team and all these things are really important. So you can't have one without the other because, to own a big piece of a small pie is like, well, okay, that's one way to do it. But, it's like also like, I'm like, I want to go and move and I
Yeah.
want to do things. So, you have to let go of some of that, but it's just where you're comfortable.
And you didn't stop with Drybar. You went into like, Beck and Quill with jewelry and then
Yes.
Squeeze with wellness. How did you kind of decide for yourself, like when it was time to say yes to something new?
Well, that was, that's where like the identity loss
Mm.
comes in after you sell a big company like Drybar, which I sold over 5 years ago. And it was a very like, oh, like who am I now? And I was trying on a lot of different things and I had started to invest in a lot of company, mostly like female founded brands. And I felt like I had learned so much, which is really why I wrote my second book, The Messy Truth, which was like, every lesson I could remember and going from like someone who didn't go to college and only like just learned on the job. And I did learn so much. I feel like I got a master's in business building Drybar because I really had to learn so much stuff to like keep up with what was going on. And so that book, was like a tell all. I was like, I just want to impart everything that I can on women or people. What I didn't kind of see coming was the fact that I would incorporate so much of my personal life in it. So I felt like as a really successful entrepreneur, I wanted to shed light on the not so pretty side and the not so glamorous side of being an entrepreneur, which I had, my mom died, my 13-year-old son went into rehab, my marriage fell apart. I mean, it was just like, wow, it was such a juxtaposition because I was on top of the world with Drybar and Drybar was so successful, but my life was kind of falling apart. And I just wanted to show that like, that's kind of where we all are and it's messy. And I was going through all of that. And then I was not like running Drybar anymore. So I was like, who am I now? And so I did start investing in other brands and we were, ideating a lot of other things. I joined some boards, which I was like, I hate long phone calls about numbers. I'm like, what am I doing on boards? But I had a lot of opportunities at my fingertips. So I was like, I was exploring a lot of different things. And then, COVID happened and I had met my now second ex-husband during that time. I was in this, like, I just don't know who I am and trying to figure it out. And it was a real spiritual journey for me personally. And then, also one of the things that I really wasn't paying attention to, but that started to happen because we were in COVID and we weren't going anywhere is I stopped blow drying my hair. And I was like, huh. And then my hair started to grow. And I started to really I kind of started to fall in love with my natural, like wavy hair, like you see now. And I was like, this is interesting, huh? And that kind of journey is really what led me to launch Messy, which we now launched about 10 weeks ago in Sephora. So kind of like got the old playbook out. And, I called Sephora and my friends at Sephora and I was like, hey, I have this idea. I'm like, I know I've been in retirement for the last 5 years, but I want to start a product line that really, gives women permission to embrace the hair that they have and gives them like the actual method of a way to do your hair that's not just a blowout. I just kind of lost the taste for the blowout and I wanted to embrace something else. And I would have never in a million years thought I would show up to an interview with like my wavy hair, but I love it now. I mean, it's just so interesting how that changes. And so I wanted to build a product line that really supported that. And all of our products have mantras on them like I am enough and I am transformed. And the, so it's an emotional connection too, because our hair is so emotional. I mean, as soon as you walked in today, someone's like, oh, your hair looks great. I mean, women, like there's a thing with hair, but what's also fascinating that I've learned is like women have so much hair baggage. Part of my mission now, which I never saw coming, was that I want to, give women that like permission to embrace what they have and not feel like they have to like, which I know is a little hypocritical, but like this idea of perfection and like that's what it was. Like I had the perfect life, the perfect hair, the perfect sons, the perfect marriage, and it was not real. And so I'm going back to this world of like, let's just like let it all be a little more real and messy and not so perfect. And that's really how Messy came to be. So it's so much more than a product line. To me, it feels like a movement of like, we're really trying to get women to, love what they have and who they are, not this idea of perfectionism. And so that's my soapbox.
I love that because it's like you're building the world around the product, right? And
Yes.
so it's interesting how it's kind of, developed with Drybar. Like even the hairstyles are like different cocktail names. And it sounds like with
Right.
Messy, what you're trying to do is like pull back the curtain and be like, this is actually me. This is what the
Yeah.
future
And it's like Messy isn't just a product line. It's this whole, creation and idea of like, embracing what you have. And I'm not anti blowout. Your hair looks amazing, by the way. I love, I still love a good blowout, but like, then there's days where you're like, I don't want to blow out my hair. I want to try something new. And I'm trying to get women to embrace that. But like you said, you used Silk Revival on your hair this morning, which it's a great after product after a blowout, so it has heat protection. So if you're curling, so it really does work for everybody. And I'm just trying to like get women to like dip their toe into like trying something new.
Well, that's really pragmatic too, because the reality is, right, for me, I do my blowout once a week when we're filming a podcast, and otherwise it's too much time. It's too cumbersome to blow my hair out, and like for what? And so you do need an intermediary step where you need product to be able to just maintain your natural hair.
And imagine if you actually liked it. I mean, there is a hole in the marketplace, which I feel like that is what Drybar was. It's like, you can go get a blowout, or you're like, well, I don't want to get a blowout today, but what am I going to do with my hair? I'm going to put it up in a bun, maybe, but what else is there? And so that was really what I've been trying to solve for is like, and then there's like the air dry, which is like, okay, that can work, but doesn't always. And you kind of don't know exactly what your hair is going to do, so I kind of came up with this idea of like twisting your hair while it's still damp with the rough dry cream in it. And then it dries. I always say like hair dries the way it stays. Because it's like when you are getting a blowout and you're using like a round brush, like you're drying it in the shape you want it to stay. When you're twisting the hair, it's drying in the way you want it to stay. So as long as you don't touch your twist, which is like, if you watch any of my videos, and there's a lot of them now of me explaining this method, I'm like, don't touch your hair. And I know it's hard because like it's in these girls, you feel like you don't like, it doesn't look great yet, but once it dries, it opens up and now it's dry and now it's set in those twists and essentially those waves. And now you can touch it and fluff it out and do whatever, and it transformed my hair because if I just let my hair dry curly, it's like, it's curly in some spots, it's straight on the other. I needed to like unify it and like conform my hair, but how do I do that? And when I was kind of in this process, I was like, there's not really products that are doing what I want it to do. And that was all kind of how it came together.
I was watching one of the ads where the girl was curling, twisting, and then she let it dry. And I literally used to do that. I remember in high school before my mom let me buy a Drybar flat iron because she was like, you're going to ruin your hair. You need to make sure you're not always using heat on it. And that was
like your mom.
My mom was like, your hair is going to fry off. And she was right. It was very fried in high school, which is why now I'm like, I only will blow dry my hair when I need to. And something I wanted to circle back on, which I thought was really interesting, is that you were building a story and a brand around Messy. And that was something that always stuck out to me about Drybar is the yellow, like the brand, the names of the hairstyles.
Totally.
What were kind of some of the transferable learnings? Like, how did you build that super distinctive brand for Drybar?
Yeah. I mean, what was so interesting about that time, my ex-husband, Cam, who I mentioned was an advertising guy. I remember when we were concepting the idea for Drybar, and I really, everything I know about branding so much comes from him and what I learned watching him, not just build Drybar, but all the other brands he built over the years. But when we were concepting the idea for Drybar, we looked around at other salons and like, what are they doing? And most of them were black and white and red and smoky and dark. And if you walked into a hair salon, there was like, a red blow dryer, a blue blow dryer, a black blow dryer. It was just like, I'm such a like OCD, like cleanliness is close to godliness. Like I like things just so. And so I hated that. And so I was like, first of all, I don't want that piece of it. But Cam, when we came up with the yellow, because again, that was completely opposite of what hair salons were at that time. It was like they were all dark and smoky. It's the best way I can think of it. Drybar was like sunny and an LA brand. And so it was yellow and bright and happy. And when we worked with our architect, because it all really worked together, our architect was this award-winning architect. He went to Harvard and he was super smart and had done like multi-million dollar homes. And a friend of my brother's, and he's like, hey, my little sister has this idea for a hair salon. Will you help us? And I remember I would show him pictures of like these like French boudoirs, and then I'd show him like a really modern space. And I knew nothing about interior design. I'd never had my own like house like that, but I knew what I liked. And he was able to really bridge that gap of like making this feel like a very like, the white marble and the beautiful millwork and the tufting on the walls and the tufting on the walls looked beautiful, but it was also to absorb sound because that we were blowing in so much noise in the blow dryers. And if you take that out of a space, it gets very, very echoey, which I was like, who knew? So many learnings. But Josh, our architect, and Cam worked very closely together. And I view branding as like every little touch point in a business. So it wasn't just the yellow blow dryers, but it was, we had these little yellow trays, and the stylists wore yellow aprons, and everything is white, and the cookies at the front, and the customer service, and the cleanliness, and the music. I mean, you name it. I was like, very particular about every single thing that we did, and I wanted the continuity between every single location, every single chair, that you knew exactly what you were going to get, and you were going to the stylist was going to use the same tools and the same blow dryer, and so that was branding to me. Like that. It was all of it. It wasn't just the name of our logo and the colors of our brand. And so when we were starting Messy, I was looking through the same lens of like, what's everybody else doing? We're going to go do the opposite. I wanted like the muted. I wanted like a very mauve, like in a very simple name, and just be very simple. And I like that aesthetic, but it's been done a lot. And so I remember like even in like those early in the kitchen meetings, as they call them with Sephora, they were like, this is pretty, but it's not going to stand out. And I was like, and I remember it like I realized like how much growth I had as a human, because that would have been very offensive to me. And I would have gotten very like, fuck you guys, I know what I'm doing at that point. But I was like, I think you're right. And I remember like being like, we're going to take this feedback and go back to the drawing board, and worked with our, creative on this, who's amazing. And we were like, it's just this is not it. We got to figure out. And so and that's when we kind of went back, and I fell in love with this bottle. They had made this one bottle that was this like amber color with a red like tomato on it. And I was like, I love the combination of red and pink. And then I have such an affinity for stars. And because I was on the spiritual journey, and I wanted the mantra. So I was like, I want to make this like a really dreamy, like, ethereal kind of brand. And because Messy I'd become a little synonymous with messy because of my book. And like, I've been very vulnerable and outspoken about my very personal stuff. Like I just was like, it's messy. And then the hair is messy. It just really all came together in this really organic, authentic way. And I think that is how great brands are built, because you're not just buying a product, you're buying into a brand. It's like, I love the term love brand, because like you do fall in love with many aspects of a brand, from the color, the way it looks, the way it smells, the way you feel about it, all of it. Like, how does it look in your bathroom? It's like that all really matters. And that's kind of how I think about overall branding.
And I want to walk back to Drybar. You guys continue to open both company-owned stores and franchise stores. Can you walk me through like the pros and cons of franchising and what you wish you'd known earlier?
It's a good question, and I could make an argument for both. I didn't originally want to franchise because I had a very tight grip on what we were doing, as you can imagine, and I was very particular on how we did it. And what I will say, and what I've learned is like, franchisees are little entrepreneurs in their own right, and they're bringing their own money and their own skin into the game, and they want things the way they want them. And I always said, like, there's a lot of ways to do things right, but there's one way we're going to do it. And not everybody loves that approach, and if you're an entrepreneur and you want to open a blow dry bar, which was like the hot thing at that time, it's like, if you don't want to do it our way, no problem, but then go do it yourself. Like if you want to do it our way, you kind of got to drink the yellow Kool-Aid and say like, okay, I'm going to lock arms with you and do this your way. Not to say that we always like took feedback and ideas from our franchisees, because, they were running their stores, they were running into things. But, to me, a good franchisee would come to us and say, hey, I have this idea. for X, Y, and Z. What do you guys think about this? Versus just implementing it. Because there were certainly times where I would walk into a franchise location and they would be doing something crazy. And I was like,
Wait, like what?
well, I won't say what location, but like I hope she doesn't hear this. We were like in the early days, we were always trying new things as you do. And we had like made these really cute t-shirts that had like, I think it was a picture of me. It was yellow, but everything else was black and white. I think Brandy Melville actually made those for us. It was like early days of Brandy Melville. And I met the owner one day in the show. It was just weird. Anyways, we made these shirts and we were selling them. And the way we were displaying them was like with a little yellow ribbon tied around them at the front desk, because we're not a fashion like retail location. And again, very particular about how everything looks. So I walked into a store and the franchisee owner had put them on a rack hanging, like like a hanging rack, and exactly my face. And I was like, yeah, no, this doesn't work. So for a lot of things.
That's so interesting, because what I was also really curious about is every entrepreneur's plight is hiring. Of course, it's just very
Yes.
difficult to find a good team. So how
Yes.
did you go about it in the early days of finding, especially I'm really curious for those initial like stylists who were
Oh,
taking
yeah.
your role. How did you go about hiring?
That was really tough. I mean, God, I haven't thought about this in so long, but before Drybar was open, we were building it. I would have, I put like ads in wherever, and I would have stylists come to my house and blow out my hair as their like audition process, which a little intimidating, although nobody knew who I was or anything. But it was like, it was first looking for personality fit. Like, are you nice and friendly and warm? Or, are you like a snooty hairstylist? And then, can you give a good blowout?
Mhm.
And that was a really tough process. There was like usually one or the other was good. It was hard to find both. And that was really challenging in those early days. And then once we opened Drybar, completely understaffed. Like I did not hire nearly enough people. And I mean, I would sit in that first chair and do blowouts and run the front desk and look to see what was happening and just kind of everywhere, which I just assumed I'd be like the manager and run the place. And then when we were opening in New York, our first location in New York was in Flatiron, and there was nothing like that here. And so I was like, shit, like we have no training program. And I was, I just didn't know like I needed to do that. And so I came to New York for like a month and like set up shop at the Viceroy Hotel, and I had stylists coming into the hotel room, blow drying my hair and everybody's hair. And we're like trying to train, and took my best stylist from LA, and we were like training stylists, because I was like, this day is very, very, very important to us that we don't mess this up. And, and I mean, we didn't, but it was a lot of work to get there. And then I realized we needed a training program. And I mean, at the end of the day, when we sold Drybar, we had 150 locations and probably close to 10,000 employees. So the training program was massive, and figuring out how to execute that, which I had no idea. But I learned as we went, and, kind of did the best I could to get our stylists.
How did you build those systems and processes? Also, aside, the Flatiron location is the one I always go to. It's right next to our office.
Yeah.
But because I'm curious, you had a specific way of doing hair. You wanted people to do it that way. And also generally in terms of like a training manual for people to have those mannerisms that you liked. How did you go about building those systems?
Well, it was like one by one, and I realized I needed to hire a team of that, like people that like ultimately reported up to me, and I would, kind of take what was in my brain and like put it into like a learning, and I would be at so many trainings, and we had this girl, Ashley, who would like, who headed it up, and then she had people under her, and then we would make kind of a top stylist, even though we didn't have like, I didn't believe in hierarchy, and I didn't want to have like, you pay more for this stylist, less for the stylist. But we would have our stylists that became training stylists. We had these training managers in every single shop. That was kind of, they were training new stylists that were coming in. They were training existing stylists, and they were watching the floor, and I mean there was a lot of iterations of the training program and a lot of manuals. And I'm like, that's not my strength. I'm not like an operations person, but I knew I needed to hire somebody who was, and who could really implement that like across the board, because it was, it was so many locations. And that was like, to me, that was our secret to success, that you could walk into Flatiron or shop in LA or in DC or wherever we were, and you would have a great experience and a great blowout. That was the hardest part of the whole thing. And, and I think a lot of times we got it right, not always, but.
And I know we're almost at time. I want to close with, you've built these incredible brand universes, these incredible businesses. If you could go back to yourself in your 20s, or just generally for people in their 20s who want to start a business, or were starting their careers, what advice do you wish you had had?
Well, I think the biggest hindrance for me when I was younger was like the intimidation I felt of like all my friends were going to college and everybody kind of knew what they wanted to do and I really didn't. And I think I felt a lot of like shame and like not good enough because I didn't know that. And yet, I mean, I
Yeah.
did okay, and I think that when I think back on that time, had I relaxed into like, and this is probably part of the little woo woo side of me, like it's all going to work out. It's all going to be fine. But we spend so much of our lives worrying about what's going to go wrong and what's not right. And I think that was what I did, and even in the Drybar era, like when we were building it, it was like there was just so many problems all the time. It was like whack-a-mole every day. I mean, that's like it's like this fire, this fire, this fire, and you just like are in it. And I was, speaking of burnouts, I was like constantly burning myself out because I was constantly like, it just always worried. I think that that's like the biggest advice I would give to my younger self is like, it really doesn't do anything to worry except like cause a lot of stress and anxiety that it's whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And you worrying and spending so much time worrying about it isn't going to serve you. And I feel like I know that now. And I mean, I have to tell myself that still all the time, but it's one of those themes that kind of constantly replays in my head because it just doesn't change anything, and I think there's also, I think for me, it, allowing myself to follow the path that felt right for me and not feeling like I had to do what my parents wanted me to do or what my friends were doing and just kind of like follow my own intuition, which I think I did. And I think it's really like the number one piece of advice I always give to, girls who are in their early 20s and they're like, I don't know what I want to do with my life, but they do. And there's this thing that they can't stop thinking about what they really want to be doing, but then they end up doing the thing that they think they should be doing. And I always try to steer someone towards like, do what you really want to do. You don't have to do it for you, not for everybody else.
That makes sense. Well, we're so excited to see where Messy goes. Congratulations
Thank
again
you.
on the launch. And thank you so much.
Yeah.
For
Congratulations
today.
on your podcast.
Thank you.